So this is week 95 of our weekly discussions. And this week we're talking about moral demandingness and grace. But first, what is EA? EA is two things. One, it's an idea, the idea of maximizing the good you can do through your career, your projects, and your donations. It's also a community that's gathered around that idea. So there are many individuals and orgs who care about this and who've dedicated themselves to various different projects. This is the EA for Christians org, so we're trying to bring these EA ideas and communities to Christians and also explore what unique aspects of EA we realize in light of our Christian identity. So today we're talking about moral demandingness, and EA commitments can be very demanding. I want to start us off with a very familiar thought experiment to help us get a sense of what I mean by this. So the thought experiment goes: a man is walking home from work one day, and it's a chilly fall day, passes by a pond where he used to swim when he was a kid. But otherwise today, everything looks still. But as he looks across the pond, he notices some splashing, and he sees what he thinks is a child drowning in the pond. And he realizes, yes, it is. And he looks around, he doesn't see any parents, and he realizes this child is going to drown if he doesn't jump in and save it. He knows he can do that. He can swim just fine. And the only problem is he has a really expensive suit on. He's coming back from work. This suit is his favorite suit. And if he jumps in the pond, it will ruin his suit. One version of the thought experiment goes, well, the man doesn't save the child. He thinks, oh, I didn't throw the child in there. It's not my responsibility that the child is drowning. I'm just going to continue on with my day. And of course, the natural response to this kind of thing is, this is awful. This is heinous. This man should, at the cost of a very expensive suit, be willing to jump in and save a life. Perhaps for a much greater cost, we would save a life, especially if that life was someone we knew. But the thinking goes, well, this isn't so morally different than the situation we're in every day, where there are something like 15,000 children who die, children under the age of 6. Many of these deaths are from preventable causes. And what moral difference does it make that these children are not right in front of us, right drowning in the pond, right next to our house, let's say? And so, this is not a thought experiment I've thought up. This is the famous thought experiment from Peter Singer's paper. What is it? Famine and Affluence. There's a lot of implications
Morality.
here. Yeah, thank you. I don't have the full title, but put it in the chat if you do. There's a lot of implications here that are very demanding, and we might ask, when is it okay not to save the drowning child? And Singer, for one, he raises a couple possibilities. He says, well, one possibility is this strong version where we ought to give to help people in extreme need, like this drowning child, or like children dying of preventable diseases, until we ourselves reach the level of marginal utility. That is the level at which, by giving more, we would cause as much suffering to ourselves or our dependents as we would relieve by our gift. There's another more moderate version, which is where we should just prevent bad occurrences unless we have to sacrifice something morally significant. But Singer goes ahead and he says, well, to me, it seems like we should affirm this strong version, which would be very demanding indeed, right? Now, I don't want to tell you what version you should adopt or exactly how demanding EA commitments should be for you. But the fact is, a lot of people in EA just make really demanding life choices. And I want to name a few examples here. So one person in our community, Jay, he is a doctor. He's a radiologist. He intentionally pursued a more competitive specialty for his medical residency. For years, went through a much more rigorous program, specifically a radiology residency, because he thought that doing this would allow him to do more good, specifically by allowing him to earn more money that he could give away. Another example is Julia Wise. although she's not specifically in the EA Christian community, she and her family, they give about 50% or more for most years of their income away to help the global poor. And also Haven, who's someone in our community who co-directs an EA charity in India and spends much of the year in an Indian city where he has no connections to, except that it's close to the fishing villages where he does a lot of his work. This can be really isolating and also very hot if you've been following the news this summer. I think it was like 45 degrees Celsius in some parts of India. And I don't think he has AC. I mean, 45, I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit, but like, well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit some days. So, EA commitments are really demanding. We can think of this in many senses. Here are a few common examples of demanding things that people in EA do. Many donate more than 10% of their income. Many do research before giving, like over 10 hours, to find the most effective ways to give. Many pursue personally less attractive careers. So people might say, well, I'm going to give up my personal dream job in order to do a job that I would still enjoy, but it does way more social good. People also sacrifice considerable amounts of time and comfort to help impactful projects. So as Christians, we can ask ourselves, are these moral demands? There is in philosophy this thing called moral demandingness objection, which is this objection that it's an objection to consequentialist sorts of claims on your ethical obligations, the kinds of claims that say, well, you have to give more than 10% of your income and you have to give up your dream job in order to pursue a career for social good. And the objection says, well, these kinds of imperatives are so extreme that they seem to cut against the common sense morality that we all have. And one upshot of some of these objections is that maybe these actions are what we call supererogatory. I'm probably mispronouncing that, but what we mean by that is praiseworthy, but not obligatory. And if you want more on this, you can check out Robert McSwain's conversation with us about this. He did a guest speaker talk with Vesa a few months ago. We have a YouTube video of that. It's excellent. And he goes into all the philosophical details and theological details. He himself is a priest and he's written papers on this specific topic. But we can ask, are these actions supererogatory? I hope we can discuss that in a bit. But we can also ask, what role does God's grace play? I think if we say, no, these actions maybe aren't supererogatory, that God does really command us to live a radically selfless life and a radically generous life with not just our money, but also our time and also our career and our efforts, then maybe grace has an even deeper meaning for Christians in EA. I'm reminded of that message from Tim Keller, or at least that quote where he says, the gospel says you are more sinful and more flawed than you ever dared to believe, but more accepted and loved than you ever dared hope. And if indeed these things are true, that we ought to give extreme amounts of our wealth away to help those in extreme poverty, well, then many of us, by implication of the thought experiment, many of us who aren't doing that are allowing many innocent children to die. And that is, you could say, a very sinful thing. At least I definitely in my own life am not where I want to be on this. Like I'm not a moral exemplar with this. But what that might mean with regards to God's grace is that, well, God's grace is even more powerful than we might have ever imagined. One possibility that I just want to lay out, I think there's a lot of nuanced opinions that Christians, thoughtful opinions that Christians can have on this. One possibility is that the radical moral demands of EA do echo the radical moral demands of God's law. I'm reminded of Matthew 5, where Jesus, I think this is on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. There's also a powerful verse in 1 John where we hear these words, which kind of echo something similar that Jesus said, which is, whoever hates his brother is a murderer. I know Jesus said things like, whenever you look at a woman with lust in your heart, you commit adultery, right? That God's law is actually much more extreme than the Jews had thought. One possibility is that the radical moral demands of EA actually echo the radical moral demands that are already in God's law. But what this means for grace is that the limitless love and forgiveness of God covers us, so that even when we fail to be good EAs, for instance, there is even more forgiveness in Jesus Christ. We see this message of grace throughout the gospel, throughout the New Testament, especially in this verse, Romans 8. There's therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So that's something I'd love to discuss. What role does this grace play in how you think about EA? What do you think are the most extreme moral commitments within EA? Do you think these are consistent with Christ's teachings? Do you think they're biblical? Do you think they're supererogatory? Do you think you have to do them, or do you think this is some aspect of a special calling? And then finally, how does grace fit into your Christian walk, your EA commitments? I talked about how this grace would under many views cover over the sins that we personally have, and it can, in many cases, empower us to be whole, maybe even to be more effective, although that might not be the primary purpose of grace. I hope we can talk about this in small groups, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.